Africa is facing a major housing crisis. From Lagos, Nigeria, and Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to Accra, Ghana, and Nairobi, Kenya, more and more people on the continent are leaving rural areas and heading for the city in search of better opportunities, and that's pushing up the demand for urban housing. The World Bank says African cities become home to over 40,000 people every day. Now, the continent could have as many as 1.2 billion people living in its urban areas by 2050. But where will they all live? Hello, I'm Heidi Adams-Fitzpatrick.
Hi, I'm Ayan Bior.
And I'm Orion Itangishaka. Today we focus on the need for affordable housing on a continent. Thank you for joining us here on Our Voices.
Now, affordable housing remains out of reach for many across Africa. The continent has the highest urbanization rate in the world, and that's driving the growth of Africa's slum population. We're going to take you inside the continent's largest urban slum, Kibera, on the outskirts of Kenya's capital, Nairobi. People here live in squalor under constant threat of forced evictions from slumlords. Amnesty International refers to them as Kenya's unseen majority. The government is now proposing a controversial new measure to tackle the country's affordable housing shortage. This is what the housing challenge in some of Africa's biggest cities looks like. Kenya's Kibera slum on the outskirts of Nairobi. Hundreds of thousands of people crammed into shanties. Many have moved here from Kenya's rural areas seeking jobs. Elvinia Mwanya and her children rent what passes for a house here.
This is the sitting room. This is the table and the chair. When visitors come, they sit here.
Mwanya pays the equivalent of $30 a month in rent.
The bedroom is this one, where the sheet is. That's my bed and the children's.
There's no electricity, no running water.
This is where we eat, in the sitting room. The stove is over there where I cook food. That's the kitchen.
Mwanya earns roughly $5 a day cleaning houses. A home in Kibera is all she can afford. She says people here blame the government for the poor living conditions.
It's like we're never heard. No one listens to our pleas. You find the leaders benefit themselves and leave us the poor with no alternative.
President Uhuru Kenyatta is promoting an alternative, a controversial plan to fix Kenya's housing shortage. He wants to build 500,000 low-cost homes by 2022, raise $500,000 a year to create an affordable housing fund, and Kenyan taxpayers would foot the bill through a 1.5% levy on their monthly salary. The idea has angered many Kenyans who vented on social media. Kenya's High Court temporarily stopped the housing levy as it wades through nearly a dozen legal challenges from trade unions and consumer groups. Economist XN Iraqi gives the government credit for offering a solution, but before it builds houses, he says the government must build trust.
But when you talk about levying people money, and then the headlines every day is about corruption, there's some inconsistency. If they can be sure the money will be put in the right use, nobody will be complaining.
While the government's plan for affordable housing is in legal limbo, private developers are in hyperdrive. Housing projects are springing up right on Kibera's doorstep. But this developer says his homes fit the aspirations of the middle class, not those in the slums.
Middle class actually cuts across people who are already in employment, maybe by the government, in private institutions, and at the end of the day, there will be a proud homeowner.
The World Bank estimates Kenya needs to build 240,000 houses every year to meet the country's growing demand. But for many in Kibera, the closest they'll come is to watch the unaffordable, spacious brick houses going up down the street. You know what's so interesting, and something I learned that I didn't realize myself, was that many of the people who live in Kibera slum are not necessarily unemployed just because of what you see on the surface where people live. You assume everybody there is unemployed.
Right.
Many people have actual jobs.
That's right.
And what's so strange about this levy, and I can understand why there is some consternation about it, is you could be living in those slums, have a job, you'd be taxed to fund, as part of this levy, to fund an affordable housing program, but you have no assurance yourself that you would actually get a house and that it would be affordable.
That's right. That's right. And when I look at that, I remember actually I lived across from Kibera. I lived in a neighborhood called Nyayo Estate back in the days, about 20 years ago, with my brothers and I. And when you look at Kibera and you look right across Nyayo Estate was actually, from what I gather, built to as a solution to the Kibera slum, that people could be able to move in there. And so that's why when we talk about affordable housing, for that the government sometimes try to do, you have to really look at what does affordable mean. Because
and affordable to whom?
That's exactly right, because the people still have to maintain a lifestyle of living in Nyayo Estate. You have to pay the utilities and everything else that comes with living in an apartment like Nyayo Estate. Yeah. So when I used to look at them and I used to look at their lifestyle, and I used to wonder, wow, this is very, very, very...
How is this a solution?
Very challenging.
Well, you lived there 20 years ago. I'm sure that if you went back now, you would see that there has been a lot of investment around the area of your old neighborhood. And, Kenya's economy is growing. And so this is going to attract a lot of investors who want to, build up new houses and new homes. But these new investments are going to target, hopefully, the middle class. I worry if they will end up neglecting the lower middle class. Just last year, Amnesty International blasted the Kenyan government because they demolished homes in the Kibera slums and displaced about 30,000 people. Those are according to Amnesty International estimates. But the government wanted to put in a new road, and the only way to put in that new road was to demolish these homes and these businesses. And I think that we see that a lot, where the concentration is on the middle class. And when it comes to the lower middle class, the people living in the Kibera slums, they are often neglected. These investments are good for the economy. There's no doubt about that. And we often think that if the economy gets better, that's going to make sure that the unemployment rate comes down. But if you look at the unemployment rate in Kenya, it's pretty much stayed the same since 2017. It's at about 9.3% right now. So you have to wonder if new jobs aren't being created, then what is the point of these new investments?
And I believe that you can build as many houses as you like. Our focus, I think, on the continent in many of these bigger cities and the countries that are really doing better is to focus on building a middle class. Because who's going to live in these homes? Who's going to be able to afford them? You need a solid middle class for that. But I think it also comes down to really giving people the kind of homes where they can feel a sense of ownership, where they can feel proud. I know all about that. In my country, in South Africa, I grew up around so much poverty, as I always keep telling you guys all the time. But, we had structures put up for people called toilet cities. These were neighborhoods where literally the government would put a toilet for you. So several toilet pots would be there on the land, and you should go in and build around that toilet. Now, how insulting is that? And that is why people, when your dignity is at stake and you get the kind of housing structures that really does nothing for your sense of being a human being, I can understand when people feel skeptical and when people are distrustful of any government housing scheme, because more often than not, they are betrayed. The promises are never kept, and it's just completely above the lives that people really live, and the expenses and how expensive it is to live in Africa.
And you talk about mistrust a lot. I think that there's a lot of mistrust in the banking sector for a lot of reasons. But one of them is just these high interest rates that people just can't attain. You look at Kenya, for example. A VOA report in 2016 said that about 30,000 Kenyans out of 42 million own mortgages. I mean, that's a huge gap, and you have to wonder why that is.
And when you think about the market women, they're not bank worthy for most of the time. So even if they can afford, they have a lot of cash, but they're not bank worthy. So sometimes it's the system that also keeps people in those slums, in those situations, because they're not bankable.
Yeah, but there's a lot of foreign firms who are coming into our cities and our countries and trying to put up new developments. China's Belt and Road Initiative is targeting Kenya's housing developments. There's a 47-story building owned by Aviation Industry Corporation of China that is scheduled to be completed next year. Who is that going to serve? It's going to, again, serve the middle class. Hopefully the lower middle class can get jobs out of it, but my estimates, I think that it's going to serve the middle class more than it does serve the lower middle class.
Yeah, and a lot of times you see it in DRC and in Angola, where you have ghost towns. They've built all these high-rises, all these beautiful developments, but nobody lives in them.
So yeah, it's a continental issue. And what do you think? What can be done to tackle the affordable housing crisis in your country? Tell us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our handle is @VOA Our Voices. Use the hashtag VOA Our Voices. You can also catch us on WhatsApp. Our number is on your screen.
Well, after the break, from sandbags to cell phones, we look at how technology is helping reframe the affordable housing market in Africa.
When we come back, we'll be joined by our guest, Nancy Welsh, advocate for green global housing.
Affordable housing is a problem in my country. And why I think it's a problem is because over years we have not put in strategies to deal with urbanization. So you actually find that in urban areas, we've got too many people living in the urban areas. And our housing policies and how we've allocated, land to our people is not been in tandem with the amount of people that are coming to live in the urban cities.
Now the country is facing kind of migration. The youth, especially in rural communities, want now to live in urban communities, and then land around the city is scarce. So then we see that the housing is pricing up, and young people cannot afford it. And sometimes we find a very small room in where we see 5 or 6 guys living together, which is not really good for hygiene and sanitation.
Voices, we're talking about the news and issues you're talking about.
Sharing stories of development and growth across Africa,
around the world, and in our lives.
Topics that inform, empower,
and change the rules.
It's time for Our Voices.
With me, Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick.
And Hadiza Kiari.
And Ayan Bior.
And Orion Itangi Shaka.
Join us on Facebook at VOA Our Voices.
It's time for Our Voices.
Welcome back. You're watching Our Voices. We're talking about the need for affordable housing in Africa. Between 60 and 70% of urban African households live in slums, and experts say a new approach to housing is needed. The United Nations recently asked urban planners to come up with innovative solutions to the problem. Sarah Kamani visited the UN Habitat Assembly in Nairobi, Kenya, and met 2 innovators who believe they might have some answers.
Vamsi Gadam taps on a model solar roofed house, an innovation he says will help deal with the global urban housing crisis.
We have the first of its kind, a solar roof, wherein the solar components are infused with our roofing product. So it's just one single roof which generates power, and the life of the roof itself is 50 years. And the solar part of it is 25 years. So we are outlasting the life of a general solar panel, whereby a roof makes more sense for you in the long run.
Gadam was one of nearly 3,000 delegates who attended the Habitat Assembly, a conference on how best to improve urban housing. He and other experts say groundbreaking innovations will be needed if people in cities are to have affordable homes. Apart from the solar roof, the walls in Gadam's model are made of improvised cement board, a substitute for wood. He says the house would cost only $6,000 to build. Across from him, Belgian professor Dr. Michel Lutz is exhibiting the Triadio house, a triangular house with hanging gardens. He says his is a smart urban technology that tackles 12 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations blueprint for ending poverty and ensuring equality globally.
We invented a kind of house which is in fact a food and income producing house. So the house is built on extremely durable water tanks, 18 cubic meters, who collects all the water during the rainy season and then gives enough water in order to grow the vegetables and the fruits that they need during the year.
Lutz has already signed an agreement with the Ethiopian government to bring it to industrial phase with the hope of adapting the technology in the East African country. Sarah Kimani, For VOA News, Nairobi.
So the question for us this week is innovation really the answer to the housing deficit on the continent? Joining us now is Nancy Welsh. She's the co-founder of iBuild Global Inc. Nancy is an advocate for affordable housing both here in the United States and in Africa and Asia. She also holds a US patent for her method of building green communities wholly comprised of recycled homes. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Great to have you.
Thank you.
So when you say you build houses, you mean that literally. I mean, you mean it. You built a house or thousands.
Not so much anymore, but when I was back running the nonprofit that I received the patent for that method, yes, we were actually renovating homes, and we were taking homes that were slated for demolition and physically relocating them and building entirely new communities wholly comprised of these recycled homes.
So tell us a little bit about how it went from buying that first little tractor you did to what your organization does now.
Sure. One of the things that I realized when I was rehabilitating and doing work in this country was that even one house at a time, as important as it is, and we can't stop doing that, even 1,000 at a time isn't enough. And take that over to the developing economies around the world, and 1,000 times that is not enough. So what can we do? What technology is out there that allows citizens themselves to be able to take their plight into their own hands? Because the inflows of capital, the titles on the land, I mean, there's so many things that you have to do to get a big project off the ground. And then far too often they actually get that project off the ground and constructed, and the very people who need it aren't the ones who can afford it. It ends up being too expensive. 70% of the construction of homes in developing economies is actually self-construction or self-managed construction.
So this is where your app comes in, because I did visit your website and I looked at the app, and it was very, it's very interesting to see that you can actually track your project step by step.
Yes.
Give the confidence to someone who's really new to this. And I thought for people on the continent, it's great, but for people on the diaspora, who are thinking about building back home, who could actually afford it. Do you get a lot of traffic on your website from the diaspora?
A lot. That question comes up every single day. Just the diaspora alone for Kenya, which is where we've had our first full market launch, that funding, and this is a report that just came out by the World Bank, that funding is up 39% of capital inflows for the diaspora. And it is 280 billion shillings just in the last year. So that's, of course, 2.8 billion US dollars, but it's a lot of money. Right. And the research that we did on the diaspora, sort of as part of the solution that we were developing for iBuild, 60% of that money flowing in is for construction or repair of housing.
That's great.
You know, I personally believe that owning Earth is the most important investment that one can make on Earth itself. And there's a demand for housing, as we talked about in the first section of the show. But even though there's a huge demand, there's also a huge deficit. What is your advice to people who just want to get started in building or otherwise owning their own homes? Are there any secrets that most people don't know about, or any uncommon knowledge that you could share with us?
Sure. One of the things that I love about iBuild is it allows you to get started right where you are. So many people spend generations waiting for the opportunity to get into an entirely new structure. And I think there are a lot of things that people can do, even in the informal settlements, to be able to improve both the sustainability and the adequacy and the security of the shelters where they're living right now.
Yeah, and I think that as we talk about solutions, I travel on the continent pretty often, and I get to go in the village, which I love because it's quiet and it's away from the city noise, city dust. But as much as I love being in the villages, I always think, we really need to do two things. Develop the city, the countrysides, and also decentralize services. Yes. In order for this urbanization issue really to be resolved, I think that if we just move all the services that are being provided in the city, which is where everybody flocks to because that's where all the services are for the most part in the continent. I think that a lot of the urbanization issues can really be mitigated because a lot of times I see that if you move government offices, we've had it in Burundi where after the post-conflict, they had a politics of decentralizing government services where people don't have to come into the cities, they don't have to flock major cities because World Bank actually says that the urban areas in Africa comprise of 700 it's 472 million people, and that it's going to double in 25 years. So I think that village people, when they can feel that the services are next to them, they're close, they don't need to flock the cities. You know, from the ones that I talk to, they don't want to live in the big cities. They want to be in the village and in the quiet places.
And that's where they own their land.
That's right. And so I think that if we maybe even your services, people in the villages can build also.
Yes.
Even people in the diaspora, they want to build in the villages so that they don't have to go into big cities. When we come back home, we don't want to live in cities. We want to be in the villages.
You know, we're talking about owning land. How is sort of your business model, how is that replicable in places like South Africa, where I come from, and where we have informal settlements and people don't own land? So building a house, you can't just build a house, but how can you ensure that they feel a sense of ownership, or they can build something of their own?
So iBuild actually works in two different ways. We have the pull strategy, which is really working with citizens on the ground, empowering them to be able to take their plight into their own hands. But we also have the push strategy, and in South Africa, that's really what we're working on, is the push strategy. And what this does is works directly with institutional lending and government subsidies, because so many of the time they create the subsidies and the lending is there, but because of the lack of transparency, there's a lot of graft, there's a lot of diversion of funds, and the houses never get built, or the subsidies never get to the constituents.
And people just don't know, they don't have the information.
Exactly. So with iBuild, the money's dispersed through the app, and we have the end-to-end value chain, so you can have the traceability of every transaction, so we ensure the housing gets built.
But what about, I love market women, and I always advocate for them, but what about the market women who are not in the formal economy? Their money is nowhere to be found, but they want to maybe be able to get a loan to add on what they have to build a home. Do you help them maybe be bankable?
So two things for the market women. First of all, we don't do things directly in the marketplace for those market women. However, those market women can have equal status on the app to be able to locate contractors, locate the workers, or the fundis, as they call them in Kenya. And that enables them to be able to have the transparency that everybody else has. Because so oftentimes, and it's the same here in the US, it's the people who have the least that tend to get ripped off the most. So because of the transparency, construction is a cash-based economy. And this is why iBuild is so important, not only to the government, but also to the people, because the people want the government to spend the money wisely. iBuild helps them do that. But the people themselves want to spend their own money wisely. iBuild helps them do that.
So what about like microfinancing loans? We've seen a lot of organizations come up to offer microfinance to women in particular. Do those work at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So in India, as an example, we're working with Mahindra Home Loans, and they have the highest number of microfinance rural loans in the country. And they are going to be dispersing through the app, and then having the people who are getting those loans, qualifying for those loans in the iBuild app, to be able to institute their construction projects and be able to manage those projects, and the contractors and the workers, and even buy materials. So then the micro lender has transparency into how that money is being used. And it's because of that, then it also de-risks the loan. The loans are paid back more frequently, and then there's more loans overall to be able to disperse to more people.
So a lot of challenges, but also solutions.
Right. And it's so exciting, all the high-tech things happening on the continent. I also happen to like low-tech, low-tech innovation. Nancy, stay with us. We're speaking about innovation in the affordable housing market, and I've been particularly impressed with this idea for years now. Houses built from sandbags. I first came across it many years ago in my hometown of Cape Town. Look at them. These are homes built in townships like this one, Mitchell's Plain. The award-winning design that started out as part of the 10 by 10 low-cost housing project, Design in Daba. Design in Daba invited 10 local and 10 international architects to produce designs for low-cost housing within the government housing subsidy budget of about $4,500. Now, this project was led by design principal Luyanda Mpalwa, and his team set out to create an affordable and dignified housing solution.
And that is truly striking, Haiti. Well, we have other female innovators in the housing sectors whose ideas can be replicated across the continent. We'll show you what they are doing after the break when we feature our Women to Watch. We'll be right back.
Like Voice of America on Facebook. Follow VOA on Twitter. Join VOA on our YouTube channel. Like, follow, join VOA.
Today, we highlight extraordinary women who are helping their communities build their way out of poverty and lay a foundation for a better future. This is our special segment called Women to Watch.
We're watching Joelle Aison. She is the co-founder of Hive Earth in Ghana. Her company creates affordable and green housing solutions. Aison's company uses eco-friendly methods of construction called Ram Earth, which utilizes mud and granite chippings. In fact, all of their buildings are locally sourced and sustainable materials. Aison believes her company's method is the type of innovation that can be replicated across the continent.
If you're going to build a house, think clean and green. That's how Chinwe Ohajiruka sees it. She engineers and builds affordable greenhouses in Nigeria. Ohajiruka used her degrees in architecture and solid credentials in green building to build her own business, Comprehensive Design Services. That meant giving up her job in the United States to help start the Green Council in Nigeria. Ohajiruka says that experience opened her eyes to the housing deficit in her home country. Ohajiruka's homes are solar-powered, self-cooling, and source water right under your feet. Her designs also allow people to build their own homes because, in case you didn't know, 96% of the houses in Nigeria are self-built.
Is there another women innovator or trailblazers you think we should know about? Tell us on social media, and be sure to watch Our Voices on the VOA website, where you can find the world latest news stories.
And we leave you with a quote from South Africa's Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, who is a patron of Habitat for Humanity South Africa. He used his voice to say, "A home gives a family a solid base from where they can improve their livelihood. A home is instrumental in breaking the shackles of poverty from one generation to the next."
And that is our show this week. Thank you so much to Nancy Welsh. She is the co-founder of iBuild Global Inc. Thank you so much for your insights today, Nancy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You're so welcome. And thank you for watching. We'll see you all next time. From all of us here in Washington, it's goodbye.